crank it, nothing happens, and there's the biggest cloud of white smoke I've ever seen. So Porsche, favorite ones, obviously, the prototype cars from the 60s and 70s. Come on, 917s, 904s, 906s, 90 whatevers. That's a proper car. In every way, they're beautiful, they're fast, they're technological, they're dangerous. They're everything cool about a car. However, when it comes to Porsches that people have attained, there's one best car that I like, and it's the 944. Yeah, I would take one over a 911. No, I mean, I was a kid in the 80s, obviously. So seeing 924s and 944s racing at Daytona with the fender flares just seemed right. And I think, honestly, that really what it stemmed from was when I was a kid. You know, when you're like 13 years old and you get the Auto Trader and you're starting to dream of having cars and you're trying to talk your dad into getting something that he won't, but he should, but he won't. I started looking at 944s. I'm like, Dad, I don't know anything and I have no income whatsoever, but we should totally get this Porsche 944. He's like, no, it requires too much maintenance. As everybody's parents does. But I was determined and it just seemed right. And the 944, a little bit of, you know, culture icon of the 80s. You see him in everything from a Cannonball Run type thing, or you see him in movies. I mean, it didn't matter if it was Cannonball Run or it was like 16 Candles. There was a 944 in it. And they look good. I mean, we don't think about it because they're, you know, the cheaper car, but that's a good looking car. And it was 80s, but not too 80s. It was like the good 80s, if that makes any sense to me, right? And my first car was an 87 Volkswagen Golf 4-door, which is cool, but it's not that cool. And I always dreamed of a 944. And I couldn't quite afford one. You know, I mean, what teenager can even afford a cheap car, basically? But I remember test driving one finally. And it was kind of ratty out in Fremont, Ohio. This is kind of even, no, it wasn't even Fremont, it was Fostoria, which is an even less glamorous town than Tiffin, Ohio, which is not saying a whole lot. But I test drove one there, and I remember going on these sweeping turns, and I just thought it was the coolest thing in the world. It was the old dash with the tachometer that starts low and sweeps the wrong way with the pointy lenses, and I just thought it was so cool. I felt like a race car as a teenager, right? And didn't buy it. My dad's like, it's a piece of junk, and he's blah, blah, blah. All dads, right? They don't want to deal with it. And I kept trying to find one, you know, and this is back in the days of newspaper advertisements, right? So it was harder. And I'd somehow con my mom into like driving the 2 hours away to Cleveland or something to go look at a 944. But they always ended up being trashed, which bugged me back then as a kid because I'm like, this isn't fair. Like, this is a cool car. What stinks is it's not worth enough, so people get them and just drive them to the bar and ruin them. And there's no good ones left. Like, come on, does anybody take care of these things? So I didn't find one. But I got into college a little bit later and I wanted to do a project. And I had a DeLorean, which I was super geeked out about in every way, shape, and form, and drove as my everyday car for 2.5 years. And I sold it because that's when I wanted to buy the Manta Mirage kit car that in another VINwiki story is what ended up getting me the job at the Ferrari shop, working there, servicing them. But I needed an everyday car. And so with money I had left over, I could probably buy a pretty decent 944. So I started looking and I found one, went to Cleveland with my dad, and had decent miles. I think it was like 65,000 miles. The interior was beautiful. It was perfect. Leather was kind of a light tan. It was the later dash, and I like the early one, but whatever. The body wasn't as good. Some dings. It was kind of faded. It was like a burgundy metallic, but I ended up buying it. It was my first 944. It was so cool. Like it just felt so great. It was, when I was younger, the DeLorean was cool, but this was kind of like a proper car. No offense to the DeLorean, but the DeLorean's so weird. It's like out there. And I was totally geeking out about the pop-up headlights because every time I'd like pick up my girlfriend at the time and I'm like, check out the headlights. Going like this. So that didn't win me any points that night. But I enjoyed it, had it for a few years. But I will tell you this, for anybody wanting to get a 944, if it's got the original clutch, do not teach your girlfriend to drive stick in it. Or anybody for that matter, but especially your girlfriend. And I was very nice and patient with her and helped her. But banging the clutch a bunch of times, they have a rubber center, which obliterated. It was gone after a day later, so all his driveline lash, and clutches are not that easy to do in a 944. So I fixed that. And that first car of mine was at Ohio State. I was going around an intersection. Kind of like when I was driving my Viper around an intersection. And some guy comes blazing across 2 lanes of traffic, cuts me off going into a gas station. I couldn't avoid it, hits the left front corner. the guy's dad goes to bail him out because he didn't want to get like a police report and hurt the insurance and all. So the dad ended up paying the estimate just out of pocket. And so I got, you know, for the estimate, I'm like, wait a minute, I've got an idea. I can get an aftermarket front end cheaper than what all this Porsche stuff costs. So I'll do that, fix it for cheaper. And literally that money, like, turns lemon into lemonade, was the money I used to buy my first tools. And my grandpa, you know, old World War II vet, he takes me to Sears. I'm like, yeah. And I get an old metal toolbox, which I still have to this day, you know, wrinkle black finish. Of course, it's got stickers and speed up. It was my first tools. And so that got into building cars and went everything like that. And I sold that car. Got another 944 later in college, which was white, my favorite color for German cars, right? But it still wasn't, I always wanted a white 944 with white Fuchs wheels and an early black interior stick shift, you know, with the funky gauges. And that was just perfect for me. It was super 80s, like Euro, rally, road racing, funky that nobody else cares about but me. And I don't need a turbo, whatever. I had that. And the other fun thing about a 944 is, so those American bumpers, they're aluminum, they're flat, and people aren't into them. The Euro bumpers are more chic and all. But there is an upside. And the girlfriend I had at the time, we had like, I don't know, a year anniversary or something. And I'm like, I've got a great idea. I'll do a Midnight Star picnic. So we drive out in the middle of the night. No one's anywhere. Stars are beautiful. I got a blanket, everything like that. And I've got like champagne because, you know, you're going to be there forever. And I've had glasses out of this. So I know it sounds ridiculous. And I was being way too fancy for what I actually was when I was that age. But it had champagne glasses on it. But a Porsche 944 bumper is the perfect place to set a champagne glass if you're having a Midnight Starry picnic with your girlfriend at the time. So I was like, yes, win, 944, what up? And my love affair continued for 944s after that. The white one was fine, but I always wanted an early dash one. And years later, I found, and I'm like, this can't be true. It was an early dash 944 black interior, red car, 40,000 miles, like asking price of 4,500 bucks. I'm like, what? Okay, we gotta go check this out. And I went with my grandmother. And actually that was the last thing I did with that grandmother before she passed away. And she was really cool. And that was kind of a fun memory because it was like our cool thing we did, got the car and all. And I really love that car because it was just from that time period. Nobody else was super into it. But it developed this weird oil problem and the slight tick. And the 944 is a subframe. It was too big a job for me to take care of what I had. And I had a buddy that worked on Ferraris, and he did a nice deal with me because he had the lifts and everything to do it. And he said, hey, I want to get electronic fuel injection like Weber manifolds, Webers for my 308 project I'm doing. If you buy me those, I'll fix your car. And that was he was being real reasonable. So I did that, we traded. And he fixes it. And the car's great, everything's great, you know, did all that stuff in the bottom end. And I was driving with a buddy out in the countryside, Seneca County, Ohio. And we're flying along. And we come to a stop sign, and all of a sudden the car starts chugging. It's like, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, what? It dies. I go to crank it, nothing happens. And there's the biggest cloud of white smoke I've ever seen. And I'm like, I do not understand what just happened. I mean, we were clipping along well, but there was nothing wrong with this car whatsoever. And I couldn't figure it out. It would just click when you go start it. And I'm like, does it even turn over? I'm like, let's push it with the clutch and in gear. And it would just instantaneously seize the wheels. And I'm like, okay, there's something major wrong. And I looked at it and it bummed me out, and they weren't worth much. And I just sold it for what it is because I figured to fix it, I'm going to be upside down on this like crazy. I need to just sell for what it is, take a loss and get out. So I sold it. I was really bummed because I liked the car. It was a good car. I don't know what the heck happened to it. And like a couple of years later, the guy that bought it was fixing it. He took it apart. He said, Casey, like the cylinder wall was shattered. It was exploded. And you know what I found? The little screw in a hose clamp that's the worm gear, the stainless steel part, found it in the cylinder. I don't know what my buddy did wrong, or whoever was helping him, but it sucked it in the intake and did that, not from anything else. Which is really disappointing because I thought he was a better mechanic. So that was the end of that. I did have one other 944 after that. Like I had to have another ROM. And I found a silver one with low miles. And it had BBS wheels on it, and it looked sad. It was the early dash that I liked with the black interior, and I put a Momo Prototipo on it, and I found kind of a remake of the old prototype Porsche race cars from the 60s with the laminated wood, which actually is not a good idea in a 944 because you put that on and it ends up being like a speaker, so you hear all the driveline noise, but it looked cool. And I had the old BBS wheels, totally powder-coated white, and they actually look really cool in the silver. And I drove that for a while when I was doing Gina's Garage. But I always am going to have a sweet spot in my heart for 944s. 911s are cool and all. Yeah, whatever. But there's a gajillion of them. But for me, the one Porsche I like forever that I would still daily drive this day if I had one is the little old Porsche 944 with an engine in the front where God and Henry Ford intended it to be.
Are you looking to buy your dream car? Premier Financial Services offers the flexibility of financing with the tax benefits of leasing. The PFS Simple Lease offers quick approvals and easy termination when you are ready for the next car. Visit our website and follow us for more.